Hello, this is Dr. Adam J. Bock. In this short audio presentation, we're going to talk about networks and a little bit about the founding team. We'll talk about the power and value of networks, building networks, and linking networking to team building. So, why address networks? Well, although most of our focus in entrepreneurship tends to be on financial capital, there are other types of capital that are critical to the organization. Human capital, such as the talents, skills, and knowledge of the individuals involved in the venture, and social capital, the connections and collaboration potential. The reality is that very few entrepreneurial ventures are truly solo efforts. I know that very often in the popular media we see stories about entrepreneurial ventures as being the hard work of a single individual. But those are much, even if those stories are accurate, they are very much the exception to the rule. An extensive body of research strongly shows that teams are more successful than these quote-unquote lone wolves. So it's important to understand how network effects actually work. A network is disproportionately affected in terms of the value that it creates by the size of the network that underlies it. So for example, here's a very simple just mechanism so you can see what this looks like. When you only have 2 phones, there's only 1 interaction between them. If you have 5 phones, there's 10 potential interactions. And by the time you get up to 12 phones, there are 66 possible interactions. So in other words, every time you add a connection to this network, you add significantly more potential power to the network than you would otherwise expect. So networks leverage private information, access to diverse skill sets, and access to power, and in particular decision-making power. The point being that as you grow your network, you disproportionately grow the impact that you can have on the potential for your venture. So one of the most common questions I get asked by students is, okay, I get it, networks are important. So how do I do it? How do I network? Well, so the problem here is that networking is a doing activity, and it's quite hard to teach in the classroom. As your textbook points out, impression management and self-confidence do matter. It's just a reality of the world we live in, that first impressions matter, and being self-confident is both a signal and a driver of your networking activity. I think that there's a couple of other things you should consider. One is take advantage of the institutional settings that you're in, especially the university. For example, I tell my MBA students in particular that if they've not made close connections with all the people in their MBA program, they've totally missed out on a significant element of the value of that program. Why? Because whether you're in an MBA class or an undergraduate business class or any kind of program at the university, you are in contact with a high-density group of future successful people. And at some point in time in the future, you might reach a point where you have an idea for a venture or some kind of opportunity, and you need money or connections or something. And your best place to start is with the people you already know. Networks benefit from self-selection and network enrollment, so recognize that whatever network you choose to connect with is going to be affected by that self-selection process. If you're a programmer and you need a business person, then going to programming conferences is probably not going to find that for you. If you're a business person and you need a coder, you're not going to find them if you go to business conferences, right? So you have to think carefully about how networks function and how you find the kinds of people that you need. You have to do a targeted search, but broadly speaking, you should have a philosophy of contributing. And a philosophy of contributing is where I think so many early networkers fail. Most commonly, novice networkers approach networking from a quid pro quo perspective. In other words, I'm going there because I need something. And so I just have to figure out how to get what it is I need. And so novice networkers often go around networking events talking about their idea and asking people for help. And unfortunately, that generally doesn't work. And especially in smaller communities like Madison, or even places as small as like a biotech ecosystem in Boston, word gets out, right? So-and-so is out there and he needs money and he needs help, right? So very often, your better starting point is to, number one, try to listen as much as possible. Yes, if people ask you about yourself, talk, but keep it, keep it succinct. Remember that as human beings, our favorite topic of conversation is ourselves. And if you spend all your networking effort talking about yourself, people aren't going to be that interested. Get other people to talk about themselves. And then, wherever possible, offer to help, right? You may be able to do a favor, or just, you may not, right? Many of the people you'll network with have, there's nothing you can do for them. But offering to help sends a good impression. And if you can help them, do help them. That may help you find ways to capitalize on opportunities. And even if you can't help someone, it makes a good impression. Relationships can be forged on mutual personal interests rather than a purely transactional basis. That's how long-term networking works. A couple things to keep in mind. First of all, the skill of networking can be learned. You may be shy, you may have a stutter, you may find it difficult to engage with people. You know what? Those are things that can be practiced. They really are. And it's important to recognize this, that yes, some people are a little better at it at the beginning, but it's a skill that you can practice over time. And if you find this difficult, then set small goals. Go to a networking event and say, I'm going to talk to 2 people. And that's it. And then the next networking event you go to, you set the goal of 3. Good networkers listen and show interest, and they try to remember names and information about the people they connect with. And if that means you have to carry a notebook with you, and after every conversation you write a few things down, or you carry a recording device like your phone with you and take notes verbally, then these are the things that you need to do, because this is how networking functions and how you build a network of people who find you to be someone they want to actually talk with and hang out with. So then there is the option of virtual networking via social media, and I do recognize that this is important and it should be done. But I have to warn you that this is not my area of expertise. So I do not have a Facebook account, I do not have a Twitter account, I don't have an Instagram account, I don't have a Pinterest account. I only use LinkedIn. And I've been on LinkedIn for a very long time, and you are welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn. If you do, try to send me a message that explains that you're in my course, because obviously I do get a lot of invitations and I can't always sort through them to figure out who on earth is inviting me to connect. But you have many other tools at your disposal, and I encourage you to choose those tools purposefully and think carefully about what you're trying to do online. Remember to focus on the type of network and the audience that you're actually trying to attract. Test your ideas with a trusted colleague before you go live, because, ladies and gentlemen, the internet is probably forever. Once stuff is on the internet, it is pretty hard to get it off again. And if you'd like to see a little example of that, I've put a link here to an article I wrote almost 20 years ago now that is still out there. And some of the links, which were a little less appropriate, have been scrubbed. But you could probably learn a little bit more about me than you actually wanted to know if you go there. And that's the challenge with the internet. I'm happy with that article. I might have written a little differently now. But remember that once you put stuff out there, whether it's LinkedIn or Pinterest or Instagram or even Venmo, it's there. And you need to think about the implications of that as you work on building your network. So let's talk a little bit about how this then relates to the founding team. So in my opinion, the founding team is arguably the single most important decision that's pretty much fully under the control of the lead entrepreneur. Most of the time, nobody can force you to take a co-founder unless, they're a co-inventor. And then, yeah, you have probably limited options. Your goal in creating a founding team is hopefully to create a group of people with complementary skills with well-aligned goals and motivation, right? If your goal is to build $1 billion company and your co-founder's goal is to make $50,000 a year and eat as much pizza as he wants, you have a problem, right? Those are not compatible goals for the most part, not for co-founders anyway. you should recognize the impact of homogeneity versus diversity. So homogeneous teams, that is teams that are made of people who are very similar, right? People who are just like you. Those kinds of teams start very fast and they feel very confident, but they have a much more limited long-term horizon. They're too similar. There's not enough skill base. Problem solving is going to look the same. Diverse, heterogeneous teams tend to start slower and require more work because people think differently, they have to get adjusted to each other, they're going to have differences of opinion. But they have greater longer-term horizon because those diverse experiences and networks and ways of thinking will help them solve problems that a homogeneous team may not be able to solve. Remember that constructive conflict is one of the most powerful entrepreneurial tools. When diverse teams find ways to have constructive conflict, to disagree with each other towards a long-term goal, they're going to find much more interesting and powerful solutions than a team that just always agrees with each other about absolutely everything. So I have a few parting comments on networks and teams for you. First of all, basic networking skills can be explained, but developing those skills requires practice and mentoring. You can't simply read a book, even as good a book as, how to make friends and influence people, which I do recommend, by the way. But you can't just read this book and then suddenly be good at it. These are practiced talents that you go out and do over and over and over and over again. Interestingly, the longer you talk to entrepreneurs, the more you will realize how much they attribute a significant amount of venture success to the network-related resources and connections. I directly benefited from the network that I got after I finished my MBA. The people who mentored me, invested in my companies, each of my companies that I've co-founded was based on the network that I had developed with the prior company. I believe, as a lot of venture capitalists believe, that the team is probably the single biggest determinant of venture success, right? A phenomenal team can take a so-so technology or opportunity and they can make it work. And if you have an absolutely killer technology, if you have a bad team, they can still screw it up. Finally, transparent and upfront communication always pays off in the end. It is hard to do. It can be embarrassing. It can be frustrating. Having early conversations with co-founders about what your goals are, what your time frame is, how much work you're really planning to put into it, and how you divide up equity and rewards, those conversations pay off. If you don't have those conversations, you are really, really likely to run into trouble with your founding team. And those can be very costly or involve long legal battles. So networks and teams are pretty critical. They're important to the success of the venture, how the venture gets going, and quite frankly, they're also important to how happy you are in running your venture. So I hope that this information and these ideas will give you some perspective on how relevant entrepreneurship is to you and some things that you could tackle if you choose to get involved.